Time for the Angler Within podcast with Roy Bilby. So here we are, episode number 5, sir.
6. Well, yeah, because I count parts A and B as 2 episodes. But yeah, it's.
I guess we'll
5.
say, all right, so we'll say that we're at episode 6, sir.
Okay. Yeah, just wrapped up the Spring Fishy Classic for Bass Pro Shops. 3 weekends all over the Northeast, different stores. Had a blast doing tank demos.
Yep.
Met a ton of great people and was able to promote our podcast a little bit. And the Instagram picked up new followers on both. So you should be seeing those numbers too. But it went well. I meet so many wonderful people doing those weekends and those promos. It's a blast.
Today, when was the lunar eclipse today?
It was Sunday, I believe.
It was Sunday.
Yesterday.
And did the fish in the tank behave any more differently?
No, they did not. They behaved just like they generally do. They still help me sell lures. They still hit them, but it wasn't reckless abandon.
So much for that theory.
No discernible change.
Well, I'm almost sad to hear that, Roy, because I was hoping it was going to be like we were on to this big time breakthrough.
So was I, but that's an artificial environment. I'm going to have to wait 28 years to try it again in the natural world.
Yep.
But we'll check the solar eclipse on April 8th for sure.
I'll be out there watching it.
I'll be out there fishing it.
I'm gonna stare right at it.
What is the time frame?
3 o'clock in the afternoon.
No, ideal.
Like right around that time, I believe.
Warmest part of the day for us that time of year.
Yeah, for sure. So we're just coming off of some pretty wild weather.
Oh my
up
goodness! You know, the calendar flips to spring, and now we get winter. You know, we didn't have winter all season, and then the calendar flips to spring, and we get one of the worst storms we've had all year. It took me an hour longer to my drive to the Utica Bass Pro Shops is only an hour and 25 minutes. It took over 2.5 hours to get there Saturday. It was sleet and freezing rain. We already had a layer of snow. Plows were out. Roads were awful. You could, if you didn't know how to drive in it, I was seeing people fishtail all over the place going, this guy's going to cause trouble for me.
How many cars off the road? Were a lot of cars off the road?
There were not many cars on the road because I left super early because I knew it would take longer.
Mm-hmm.
I saw one car off the road, but I only saw a few other cars. But I did have one guy pull out of a side road and fishtailed all over the place. When I got to the store, they told me where their parking lot, they're having their morning meeting and before they open the store at 9. And I usually get there leaving at the time I did. I should have got there at 8:15. I like to be there for the morning meetings. And I got there at 9:15. So they're having one of the guys was telling me we're having our meeting and there's a narrow lane that parallels their parking lot. And in the grass between that parking lot and that narrow lane, there's a whole row of boats they got all wrapped for the winter and to pull out and in the shop and clean up when somebody buys a boat. And the only thing separating that lane from that grass strip where the boats are is a low guardrail. And here comes a guy in a Jeep, okay? A Jeep suddenly does 4 360s. They're watching this guy sail past all these boats doing 4 360s, and he came to a stop facing the wrong way, turned around, kept going on his way. They said, now that's a narrow lane. How in the world he never clipped the guardrail or a light pole or anything, and then he turned around and kept going? I said, he should have been thankful the car was pointing back the way he came. He should have gone home, changed his pants, and said, that's enough for today.
Or you never know. Maybe he, because the guy was probably a northerner, he just stayed calm and waited until the ride was over.
Last time I did 8 circles, that was nothing.
Yeah, we lost power out here for 12 hours,
Yeah,
and there's ice
people
on the lake now as well. There's ice back on the lake.
I get asked a lot when I'm doing my demos and seminars about what kind of line I use, and I use 3 types of line, and I was old school, so I grew up with mono, and the only braided line we used were on our tip ups for ice fishing, so you could feel it with frozen fingers,
Hmm.
and braided line didn't exist. There was monofilament. The only company that really expanded on that was Berkeley, Trilene. They had the XT and the XL. XL stood for extra limp. That was designed for spinning rods, spin casting rods, and they
Extra
had
limp.
extra limp,
Hmm.
XL. That's what the XL and Berkeley XL stands for. That was the red box. The blue box was XT, and that stood for extra tough. That was for bait casters. And that's how I used them.
Okay, I am already learning a ton. I thought that the XL was like extra large or something. That shows how much I've ever paid attention to what kind of line besides what pound test it was that I was putting on anything.
Or thought about it, because why would you buy a spool of extra large 4-pound test? That's small line.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
But go on.
Okay. So, and I used that for years, and that's the applications I used them for. When they came out with braid, who was the guy? I'm thinking it was Randy Dearman, a bass angler back in the early 90s, I think. He won a Texas tournament using a braided line. Companies were trying to develop it, and they didn't even have a name for the product, but he was a pro sponsored by different companies, and they had given them these prototype lines to try. It was 80-pound test braid, but it was, the diameter of 20 or 25-pound mono, which everybody was using for jigs and heavy brush. And that's what this lake had. He had 80-pound line, and he won the tournament because he was the guy that was getting these big bass out of this heavy brush. And he talked about it on the on the stage when he won the tournament, saying, well, I was using a braided line that my company's developed. We don't even have a name for it yet. And he said, it's 80-pound test. He said, if I got hung in a bush, I would wrap the line around my back anchor cleat, and I would engage the motor and idle away and pull that bush right off the bottom and get my lure back and keep right on fishing. And so they gave it a name, Lynch line, and they couldn't make it fast enough. And it was a year later when everybody else came out with their brand of braid. And I had a guy I was fishing with at the time. He went to the braid. Now, this guy only used spinning rods, and he loved it. He bought the braid, put it on his rods, and said, oh, you're going to want to use this stuff. You're going to want to use it. You're going to switch everything. And I'm like, nah, the jury's not out on that stuff yet. And they had problems in the beginning because rods weren't built to handle it. The guides weren't built to handle it. The early braids were pretty coarse, and they would cut grooves in the guides because they just weren't made for it. And guys were not used to setting the hook with braid. They give it the same hook set they gave with mono, which had a lot of stretch, and they were shattering the rod blanks. So
Sure.
there were a lot of issues early on, but as time went on, things that rods were made differently, guides were improved. Fuji makes tremendous guides that braid has no effect on them, and a lot of companies use those guides when they build the rods. So, and the lines got softer, and eventually I finally came around and started experimenting with it. And now I tell people this: I have gone to braid for all of my spinning rods. And if you use nothing but a spinning rod and you're still using mono, you're familiar with the issues you have with mono. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. I mean, the old school process was 9 times out of 10, if the way the manufacturers wind the line on their spools, if you put that spool on the floor, label down, and load your reel, you're not supposed to get any line twist. You still do. If you spool it and put it on a pencil and spin it and spool it.
You know what I use?
Oh, what?
The antenna on the car.
Yeah.
I'll throw it on there usually is what I'll
And
do.
you still get line twist, don't you?
Totally. Of course you're going to. How will you not get a line twist?
Use braid.
Well, no, but I use the braid. I mean, I guess I didn't notice with the braid, but on the mono, I definitely did that. I've switched to braid on all of mine, with the exception of my ultralight. Do they do ultralight braid?
That's all I use.
Oh, I need that. I need that badly.
I use spider wire stealth braid, 6 pound in their moss green. It's 6 pound. 6 pound braid. Okay. The break strength is like it's over 9 pounds.
So on a 4.5 foot ultralight rod, I can put braid on that.
It's a diameter of sewing thread.
Right.
I don't use a leader, but I'll get into that in a minute. But yeah, that's the braid I use on my ultralights. Cast a mile. Here's the problems with the mono with the spinning rods. Or spinning reel. You're always going to have line twists. Get used to that. And sometimes you make a cast and you look and you got a loop halfway down your spool. Farther than you've ever casted, there's a loop sticking out. Yep. How did that get there? I don't know. It's just a magic thing with monofilament and spinning reels. It's a Houdini trick.
It's basically the same thing as getting a wind knot.
They're different. The ones you get on the spinning reels, I call those Houdini loops because they're mad. How did that get there? You know, David Copperfield couldn't make that disappear.
way to date yourself.
That's funny.
David Copperfield.
Make this disappear, and you're the best in the world. So, I mean, man can make a jet disappear from a sound stage, but that loop will still be there on the spinning reel. I can promise you that.
I'm making note of this line for my ultralight rod, by the way.
Yeah. Spider wire, stealth braid. I've tried different braid. I tried their easy braid, not a fan of it. It frays a lot, but I've tried the Suffix 832. I use that. I use the Bass Pro XPS braid, and I use the spider wire stealth on my ultralights. I use the stealth because it's coated and it's softer and quieter. That's why they call it the stealth braid. But it does not fray at all. And like I said, for my ultralights, it's a diameter of sewing test. It's like 1 pound diameter, 1 pound test mono. But it's strong. With that braid, I couldn't do this with mono. If I get hung up, I could just put pressure on it, bend that hook, bring it back, straighten the hook, touch it up with a stone, and I'm good to go. I wish I'd got on the braid bandwagon sooner with my spinning rods, because that's all I use on those now. And here's the reason why. If you're still using mono with a spinning reel, you're getting a lot of line twist. It's unavoidable. You get twist when you spool them up initially. There's a good way to eliminate that original twist, and that is when you get out on the lake, before you ever even make a cast, whatever you have tied on the line, cut it off. No swivel, no nothing. Just empty line, and get the boat going at an idle and pay out that line behind the boat. Let out half a spool. You'll never cast that far. Let out half a spool length and then close the bail. Put your rod tip in the water, and just the drag of the water will take all that twist out of the line. And when you reel it in, it'll be as straight and limp as can be. And that'll last a while. But depending on the type of lure you use, a swivel helps. I would always tie direct because I don't want any more hardware on there than I need. But you'll get line twist. And a lot of that comes from most people when they make a cast. I see everybody do this. They use the handle to close the bail because it automatically closes it. But when you do that, it automatically puts a loop of twist in that line. Every single cast. You can straighten your line and you're good for about 50, 60 casts, and then you make a cast and it blows up, line everywhere like a broken slinky. And I'm like, this is brand new line. I straightened it. Now I got to cut it all out. And it's just an inherent characteristic of mono. It's got a lot of line memory, and it twists. And just by virtue of using it, you get line twist. And you can straighten it again, but you're going to end up doing that over and over and over again, because just by the nature of the way the reel operates, you get twist. Another thing people do that really twists the line is they have their drag too loose, and they'll be cranking on a fish, and I'll hear that drag going out. As you're spinning that handle, you're trying to put the line on in one direction, and as the drag is paying out, it's paying it out in the other direction, so you're getting double the twist, and then your reel blows up again with a bird's nest, and then you can get wind knots. And just all these things, all these problems with mono, I've eliminated them by going to braid on a spinning reel. Now you can close the bail with a handle. I don't, because for decades, I've closed it manually to avoid that line twist. But I still do that because it's a habit, but I don't need to because I use braid. The only negative with the braid that I've come across is the wind knots. But there's two things I do that virtually eliminates them. It'll eliminate 90 to 95% of your wind knots. Two things you can do. One, most people overfill their spool. It doesn't matter what kind of line they're using. Most people overfill it. If you do that with mono, you open the bail to make a cast and it dumps out of there like a hyper slinky because there's just too much line. When you fill a spinning reel spool with monofilament, you're supposed to stop within 1/8 of an inch of the outside lip of that spool. No more than that. You should see 1/8 of an inch. That's where you stop. With the braid, I leave just a little bit more. If you leave 1/8 of an inch showing on the spool with braid, you'll still get wind knots. So I stop, while there's still a little bit more than 1/8 of an inch showing. It doesn't matter. You're not cutting down distance on your cast because this braid will cast half again as far as mono with the same cast. It's just so smooth casting. You'll increase your distance. You won't believe how much farther you can cast the same lure with the same rod and reel by switching to braid. It's amazing. The other thing that causes wind knots is casting too hard. With braid, you don't have to do that. Just a gentle lob cast and it's going to sail out there. Where people forget is when a fish breaks within casting distance and they crank that in and they fire as hard as they can to reach that and it blows up with a wind knot.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do that. After a while, you'll be used to casting with the braid and you don't have to overpower your casts ever with the braid. The rod will do the work and the line will do the rest. That's why I've switched to braid on all my spinning reels. I use it on bait casters too, but now I'm using on my spinning rods for tournaments, I use 10 or 15 pound braid. That's what I use. It's small. And if I'm using 10 pound, people will be surprised. In most cases, I don't use a leader. And I've had people fishing with me going, you're tying direct with your braid? I'm like, yeah. They're like, doesn't that prevent you from getting strikes? I mean, I use a 4-foot leader. You don't do that? I said, well, I'm looking at my counter. I got 12 smallmouth. You got 11. No, I don't. I don't think it's hurting anything.
So they're putting a mono leader on the end of their braided line?
In most cases, fluorocarbon.
Fluorocarbon. Okay. Interesting.
If I use a leader, half the time it's fluorocarbon, half the time it's mono. I use very little fluorocarbon. I use it on my crankbait rod, and that's it so far. And the problem I have with fluorocarbon is I tried it too early when everybody talked about it, and the earlier versions had a lot of memory. I mean, more than mono.
Right.
Like I think the first fluorocarbon, and the thing is, it's invisible in the water. It's invisible.
Sure.
Doesn't matter what size it is. So I got 20 pound for flipping into heavy brush because it's supposed to be abrasion resistant and all that. Problem was, it was like a slinky. It was horrible, but it was an early version. So I went, I'm not using this stuff. So I was mono and braid. I do use the newer fluorocarbons. They're a lot better. They don't have the memory that the early ones did. And I'm happy with it for crankbaiting because it helps you to control the depth better, get a little bit deeper. Braid and mono float. Fluorocarbon sinks.
Mm-hmm.
And it's invisible in the water. I like it for a crankbait.
How about when you're throwing a soft plastic on like a 2-all hook? Are you putting a leader to that, or are you tying direct?
No, I'm still using mono for that.
Okay.
I'm just using straight mono.
Okay. For anything soft plastic wise, you're using mono. Anything heavier than that, you're using braid.
if I'm my braid on my bait casters is for my heavy jig sticks for frogging, running a plastic frog over top of grass mats and stuff like that. Braid really helps with that because if they bury in that stuff, you can get them out. I'm going to start experimenting a little bit with a fluorocarbon for my Texas rigging. I'm still using mono for that. I have no issues with the mono. I'm not missing fish. It works for me. So, kind of like if it works, don't fix it. But I just want to experiment with the fluorocarbon for that and just see if there's any big improvement with my success with it and if that makes a difference.
So am I not getting any hits on my soft plastic because they're tied to a braided line?
I don't think so.
I
don't think so.
Does that matter?
Are you fishing crystal clear water?
You know the lake that I'm at. I mean, it's clear enough,
Yeah.
but
It's got a little color to it, but it's fairly clear. Put mono on one rod and braid on the other, throw the same bait on it, see which one catches more fish.
I'll give it a shot. I'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm willing to fish with you and see for myself. How's that?
Yes.
We got to do that again this year.
We got to get out soon. We need to get out more than once a year. There's no excuse now.
Here's the thing.
Except for when you're out working or competing, or I'm working. But still.
I've been people were asking me, how did you get into a podcast? And I'm like, well, I kind of got an invite from the producer. And the way that worked was I said, JD and I had a history. We were both involved in the Boy Scout program. He was a district executive. I was a unit commissioner. And we ran into each other in the scouting program through scouting a lot. I was an adult leader for, good grief, 25, 26 years. And through that program, you were camp director one year, weren't you?
3 years.
Okay. So I think the last year you were there, you got a hold of me and said, hey, would you be interested in coming up, one night a week to do fishing seminars for the campers? I'm like, yeah, giddy up. I'd be all over that.
I sent you a picture of you.
Now we're going back.
You were still working. I was babyface as well. Now I'm a lot grayer.
Yeah.
You're retired.
Me too.
I'm grayer and you're retired.
Yeah. But yeah, good for me.
So speaking of back in the day, what's Sister saying about spraying on fish attractant these days?
Well, here's the thing. Back in the day, and I'm talking late 80s, early 90s, fish scents were all the rage. I mean, there was a company, Fish Formula, and Bill Dance, Jimmy Houston, Roland Martin, that all these guys promoted this. I believe Hank Parker did too. So of course, we all bought Fish Formula. They had the original scent. They had a shad scent, a crawfish scent. They had one made for catfish. And then a few years later, they came out with sparkle scales that had glitter in it, and which is pretty clever actually. And these were oil based, and Fish Formula was a product that everybody promoted. So of course I had to use it and try it. And it said on the bottle, formulated by a pharmacist and avid fisherman. Like, okay, this guy knew what he was doing. He was not only a pharmacist, he was a fisherman. So that's the best of both worlds. And they promoted it heavily and showed how good it worked. So we bought it. And I even had the Fish Formula caddy that they sold through Jimmy Houston Outdoors. He had it on his boat. Well, I had to have them for my boat. So I bought a bunch of them and installed them in all the boats. They would hold 3 bottles and would hold a pair of pliers. They had a little tray in the front where you could put hooks and stuff, and they were actually pretty handy to hold a lot of things. But I always had it loaded with a couple bottles of Fish Formula, the original scent, the crawfish, and the sparkle scales when they came out with that. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't use it all the time, and the only way I really found that it did make a difference was on those days when we were using our best lures and we could just not buy a strike. All right, now I'm going to put the Fish Formula on and put this stuff to the test. I can't tell you how many times I did that after fishing for an hour without a strike, using the exact same lure, put that Fish Formula on there, and very first cast, I'd catch a fish. And that was pretty convincing to me. I can't tell you how many times that happened. So I was a firm believer in the fish formula. There was another company, Riverside. Riverside. I'm pretty sure it was made by Riverside Lure Company. They made a lot of soft plastics that I use, and they had it was a flatter bottle, but they made it in crawfish scent. And I looked in my basement before we recorded this, and I had a couple I still had a couple bottles of Riverside, only the crawfish scent. So that's the only one I ever used from them. But I got away from using the scents because companies started coming out with scented baits, and they they do work well. I mean, and a lot of companies have their own proprietary, patented scent that nobody else uses. Yum, the Yum Saw Plastics, that's their scent. That's their own scent. Fish formula smelled very strongly of had that licorice smell to it, and that's I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Is it pronounced anise or anise? It's Anise. It smells like licorice. I don't know how you correctly pronounce it, but a lot
Anise?
of those fish scents had that ingredient in their chemical makeup. And a lot of the baits today, you can still smell a trace of that. The scented baits, like I said, Yum, that's their proprietary brand. Bass Pro Shops has their own scent. They call it 8 Up, and you can smell that in it as well. They came out with an aerosol spray made by a scent called Bang. It's in a black aerosol can with a red cap.
You got your some of that Bang in a
Yeah,
can.
yeah.
Some of that black Bang.
It's we use that for smallmouth. It's a garlic scent. And garlic? What are these? What does smallmouth eat? A lot of pasta? What's
Black garlic Bang in a can.
Yeah.
And it worked, huh?
It worked. Smallmouth love it.
Did it make
something
you hungry?
about garlic, smallmouth, it doesn't repel them. I'll tell you that.
Did it make you hungry?
No, it didn't make me hungry at all. Don't spray that. Fished with a guy and he was upwind and spraying it all over his bait, and all this yellow mist is coming down. I'm like, what are you using? He's like, I'm using Bang.
Got some of that black
It's
Bang.
awesome. But he was crushing the smallmouth. I went, well, he is and I'm not, so I better get some Bang. And we used it in tournaments for years. I still keep a can in my boat because there's days when it does make a difference. But I got away from using the scents because companies started coming out with scented lures. I'll tell you what that old fish formula is really good for is if you're fishing in a lot of heavy grass and brush, and I use a jig in that scenario. If you coat it with that stuff, it doesn't hurt. I mean, fish still do bite it, and it slides through that stuff easier because it's got a very oily coating on it. But there was guys that were using it on crankbaits, and I mean, 2-3 casts, it's washed off. So that just didn't make any sense to me. I would always use it on either plastics that I was dragging on the bottom or a jig. It made no sense to use it on a surface lure. So I basically relegated it to soft plastics and jigs. And I still have some, but I hardly ever use it because the scented baits nowadays are so good. And the ones that I've used, and I got a great story about this. I mean, most people know, and for those that don't, Berkley Trilene, Berkley Power Baits, when Power Bait first came out, it was in the early 90s, and I didn't know anything about Power Bait. I was real familiar with Berkley because all I used was Trilene and the Bass Pro Shops line. That's the only two lines I use, and very happy with both of them. I didn't like the Mickey Mouse glow-in-the-dark Stren, as I called it. And then years later, Berkley owned Stren. So still, I was fishing a place that was known for super big largemouth. And this place, it was about 2 hours from my house, west of my house. It was a private lake, belonged to a rod and gun club, but they stocked it, and they claimed that they had the next state record swimming in there. And they had, 2 club members that had both caught it once and released it, and it's still out there, and you had to pay to fish it. So I never knew if that was a lot of hype or what the deal was. Did they really have giant largemouth? The biggest we ever caught out of there was 4 pounds. Not that big, but there were good solid fish in there. Well, I'm fishing it one day with a buddy. We had fish located in a huge lily pad field. It was a hot summer day and the water was cooler underneath those pads, but this was a massive pad field and they were not hanging around the outside edge. They were back in the middle of it. That's the only place we could get bit. So we're throwing a Texas rig plastic worm because it'll come through that without getting snagged. Problem was, I was hooking a lot of fish using a Bass Pro Shops Squirmin' worm, my favorite worm at the time. I was catching hooking a lot of fish, and halfway back, they'd wrap up in the pads and either get stuck and break loose, or I'd pull back a handful of pads. I only landed one or two. They were wrapping up in the pads and getting off. Meanwhile, my buddy is catching one after another. And it's driving me nuts, because this guy hadn't been fishing that long. And he kind of started doing it with me. And I was like, Larry, what are you doing that I'm not using? And he just kind of chuckled. He said, I'm using power bait. I said, well, what the heck is power bait? He said, these. And he tossed me a package, Berkley power bait, 7-inch power worm. Same color I was using, but it was power bait. I'm like, so what difference does that make? He said, well, they're scented. Open the bag and smell it. I opened the bag and went, phew, holy cow. What is that? He said, that's power bait. And here's a nugget for the listeners and how many people can relate to this. When we first started using power bait, we thought, good grief, that stuff smells horrid. But the more we caught fish on it, the more we liked the smell because fish absolutely ate it up. And after about 2 years, we were like, man, I wish they made this stuff in a cologne, My wife wouldn't like it, but I would never have fish repellent on my hands.
65% of the time, it works all the time.
Yeah. Math was my sub major. So I thought the stuff smelled horrid, but I couldn't. I said, so how come your fish aren't wrapping up in the pads? I mean, if you're getting as many bites as I am, if not more, how come you're landing the fish and I'm not? He said, well, because I'm using power bait. I said, yeah, that's not telling me anything. He said, well, they hold on to it longer. And I think on the package it said fish hold on to it 8 times longer than other baits. And he says, it's true. He said, what I'm doing that you're not doing is when I feel a fish pick it up, when I feel that tap, I don't set the hook. He said, I just slowly start reeling. Then I just slowly reel, and that fish holds that bait, and I slowly reel until I have him all the way outside the pads, and then I swing. I said, get out of here. He said, look, I'll show you. Watch. He makes a few casts. He gets a tap. He goes, I just had one hit. I'm like, how do you feel that and not swing? That's an automatic reaction from me, but I saw his rod tip bounce. He said, there's the strike. And he just starts reeling in slow motion. I'm not kidding. He led that fish like a dog on a leash till it got all the way out. I'm like 20 seconds. And then he swings and his rod loads up. I'm like, that fish still had that. He said, yeah, I got to be careful they don't swallow it. But, that's what I'm doing. I'm like, well, I can do that. So I take my worm and I throw it out there. When I feel a tap, I just slowly tighten up and the fish lets go, drops it. I tried it again, get a tap, slowly tighten up, fish lets go. I'm like, hey, give me one of those worms. He's like, well, I only got one pack. I said, so I've given you stuff. Give me one worm. No, man, I only got a few left. I used them yesterday. I only got a few left. I'm like, well, thanks a lot. Well, he's fishing. He catches he's caught a bunch of fish. Finally, he goes, well, this one's too torn up. It won't stay on the hook. So he discards it, grabs a fresh one out of the pack that is for Larry's use only. And so I take this one that's all tore up. And I'm like, yeah, I can't get to stay on a hook because the head is all shot. So I shorten it and I rig it. Got to go to a smaller hook. So I tie on a smaller hook. I rig this thing. I throw it out there and I get a tap. No lie. True story. I get that tap, I slowly tighten up, and I can feel the fish still there. 20 seconds later, I have him outside of the pads. I swing and load up, and I catch that fish. That was 1992, I believe.
And how big was the fish that you pulled out of the weeds?
I don't remember. I don't remember. It was 1992, but I'll tell you this, I have been using power bait ever since in every shape and form they make it. I have won tournaments on the Berkeley Power Worms in blue fleck and red shad. I have won tournaments on the Berkeley Power Lizard, the craws on the back of a jig as a trailer. I've won tournaments on. Power bait is the real deal. When I first went, when BASS had the Bassmaster Kmart Top 100 series, the first year they did the Pro-Am format, I put in for it and I got drawn for it, fished up to Lake Champlain. I got there a day early. There was one practice day left. Chet Dothett was a pro fisherman at that time from Florida, used to play he had a contract for Miami Dolphins, and he played 1 year and got injured, which ended his career. So he became a pro fisherman. And I fished with him the last practice day. And he said, if you wouldn't mind, would you mind throwing a buzz bait for a while? Because, you're going to help me out here. I'm going to use what I use, but I've heard this is a good lake for a buzz bait. Would you mind throwing that for a while and see if I said, no, I'll do that. Sure. So I threw it for about an hour. He wasn't catching any fish. I wasn't catching any fish. After an hour, he said, you don't have to keep throwing that. I said, I'm just trying to help. He said, yeah, they haven't hit it. They're not going to. So I picked up a 3-inch. We were in the smallmouth area. I picked up a 3-inch Berkeley Power Grub, which had become my go-to for smallmouth. 3 casts, I had 2 smallmouth. Second one was big, and he turned around and goes, "Whoa, what are you throwing?" I said, "I'm throwing a Power Grub." He says, "You mean like a Berkeley Power Grub?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "I thought that stuff was just a gimmick. This is a pro fisherman. Okay. This is 97. I thought that stuff was just a gimmick." I said, "Oh no, this is the real deal. This is what I use and this is what it does. We haven't had a bite all morning. 3 casts, I got 2 smallmouth. That's why I use power bait." He goes, "You got more of those?" I said, "Yes, I do, because I share, Larry." I hope he's listening. I've been using power bait ever since. And the thing about the power bait is it really is effective. It really works. I have a tote in my basement that I can't even pick up. It's so heavy with power bait. A few years later, well, I see, probably in early 2000s, 2011, 2012, somewhere. I don't remember the time frame. They came out with Gulp, and this was supposed to be the even better than power bait. And it I'll tell you what, for smallmouth, the Gulp minnows and grubs, we caught so many smallmouth in tournaments with those. It was just insane. The Gulp stuff was magic. Now, and that stuff, it was water soluble. If you pick up a package on the store shelf, it feels cold. Once you start using it, you have to keep it wet. If you don't, it'll dry out.
Yeah, I used the Gulp shrimp when I was down on the coast. We did some fishing in the inlets looking for drum. Okay. And we were throwing Gulp shrimp. Same deal. You had to keep it wet, otherwise it would dry out and be worthless.
When I'm running down the lake, if I'm using that in a tournament, I would take a Ziploc bag, put it in the Ziploc bag, still attached to my line, and throw it down in a rod locker. And I'd run to the next spot, shut down, come off pad, drop the trolling motor in, open the rod locker, pull that rod out, and open the Ziploc bag and just hang it over the side with that bait, just barely below the surface so it was staying wet. And if I saw something come on the electronics, I would drop shot that Gulp down there and load up. It was magic. But the problem people had with the Gulp was it wasn't durable. And I think it's because it was so water soluble. And by the way, the deal with both of these Berkeley products, the power bait and the Gulp, fish could actually consume them and digest them. They can't do that with any other plastic product. And this is an appeal to everybody who's listening. Please do not discard your old fishing line or your old plastic baits in the lakes. Please do not do that. We all have to be stewards of the resource. And I want to teach and preach that to people because fish see these soft plastics on the bottom. They're realistic looking. If they ingest them, they block their intestinal passage, and the fish can literally starve to death because they can't digest and pass food anymore. And discarded plastics have unfortunately killed an untold number of fish in our lakes because there's no other word for it. There's slob fishermen out there that won't take the time to drop it on the floor of the boat and clean it out when they get home, like I do and like other responsible outdoorsmen do. Same thing with fishing line. If you've got to get rid of your line, use one of the dispensers at the launch or take it home. I take mine home. I pick up other people's line and lures and take it home and pay my garbage man to haul it away because I want to be a good steward of the resource. So I'm done preaching, but people, please adhere to that. And I'll appreciate it. The fish will, and you will too, and so will everyone else that uses the fishery. So the gulp was water soluble, and the problem was you catch 2-3 fish and it just won't stay on the hook anymore. So you went through a lot of baits, and people weren't thrilled about that, but they bought it because it worked so good. We went to a tournament on Oneida Lake. Charlie Hartley was there, and most people know who Charlie Hartley is. He was on the Elite Series for a few years. He dropped out of contention. He still fishes all the opens. He's a very positive guy. Love Charlie Hartley. He's awesome. He's the guy with the Ranger boat that has the Venom wrap. Venom lures, they had a snake skin on the packaging. So he's got the Ranger boat that's decked out in black and white snake skin. Very distinctive. You can always spot Charlie on the water. He's a tremendous fisherman. We saw him on Oneida Lake, and he was rigging his rods with that gulp, and he was grinning, saying, this stuff ought to be illegal for smallmouth. It's so good. You know, it is. It's like smallmouth candy. But to improve on that, Berkley came out with their latest version, which is, good grief, this stuff. Max Scent comes in white and purple packaging. It too has a unique odor, but it's the best of both worlds. It's got the scent capability of, and it disperses scent when it's in the water. It leaves a tremendous scent trail that fish lock in on. Smallmouth, walleye, largemouth, you name it. For smallmouth on a drop shot, the Berkley flatworm, when they first introduced it, it was used at a tournament on the St. Lawrence, and you couldn't find it after that. 2 days later, you couldn't find it anywhere in the country. It was wiped out. They couldn't make it fast enough. But the thing about the Max Scent is it's more durable than the power bait was, and its scent is more effective than the gulp. So it's just, I don't know how they keep improving, but they do. And as far as the scented products I use nowadays, I still use the original power bait, gulp, and Max Scent. Depends on what I'm fishing for. But they all work. They all do what they claim. And I can personally attest to that. And I would bet my bottom dollar so can everybody else who's ever used their products. You use the gulp. How did that work for you? I'm going out on a limb here because I don't know.
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Well, let me think here. I caught some small stuff. We didn't get any drum. I was catching like pinfish on it and some croaker, but like didn't get any drum on it. So it does work for sure. But you know, fishing for drum in the inlets isn't exactly the easiest thing either.
I've never used it in a saltwater application.
It was made for saltwater, yeah, because it was shrimp. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Comes in a turquoise blue color in the packaging. All that stuff has got a blue to it.
Yeah, saltwater version.
Yep.
There's another scent product that you're going to be hearing a lot about this because yesterday was the final day of the Bassmasters Classic World Championship. It was held on Grand Lake of the Cherokees in Oklahoma. Tremendous fisherman, a young guy, been on the Elite Series a few years, only his second Bassmaster Classic World Championship. Justin Hamner, he won the event wire to wire, led all 3 days, pocketed a nifty 300 grand and a 50-pound trophy that's coveted around the world. Plus endorsements from sponsors for using their products during the tournament. and winning with it. He used a product called Bait Fuel. Now, I'm familiar with it. I've never used it, but that's going to be skyrocketing in sales because Bait Fuel is something that's been out a while. I've seen a lot of advertisements for it, and it comes in like he used it in like a chapstick version. It came in a tube with a cap, and you actually comes out like a paste, and you rub it on your bait. Now he was using jerk bait, crankbait. On his forward facing sonar, he was seeing like 6 or 7 fish peel off a school and track his bait to the boat and not hit it over and over and over. And he said he rubbed that Bait Fuel on it, and next cast he hooks right up. So, and that happened repeatedly for him. And he was actually saying that on the weigh-in stage that he said that stuff is amazing because they were tracking the bait, tracking it, would not hit. And I rubbed that stuff on it, and next cast I'm catching them. And that's how I won. So that stuff is going to go flying off the shelves. And if I'm going to get some. I fish tournaments. I would prefer to win. So I don't think it's a gimmick. And they finally got something for a crankbait or a jerk bait because you rub it on as a paste. So it's going to take a lot longer to wear off.
Interesting.
Yeah. I found it interesting. I think he's going to be a good champion. He's a young guy. He doesn't like to talk, but he's going to end up doing a lot of that over the next year as he's the biggest ambassador for the sport. So he's suddenly in demand everywhere for speaking engagements, appearances, and stuff like that. His calendar's going to fill up. His year's going to be a whirlwind, and good for him. Good for him. Got a lot of years ahead of him. He's had a heck of a year. He finished, I think, 14th in the first tournament, and I think he was third in the second one. He had a top 5 in the second one, and then he wins the third tournament, which is the Bassmaster Classic Championship for 2024. So he is on a roll and riding the crest. So good for him. My hat's off to him. Bait Fuel, everybody. Get it while you can, because it's going to be flying off the shelves, I am sure.
So for all of you out there who have any questions for Roy, hit us up over at the old Gmail account, anglerwithinpodcast@gmail.com. Send us your questions, comments, or concern. And of course, check out Roy's Instagram page. And we forgot to say it at the beginning of the episode, but thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, we appreciate it tremendously. It's awesome. We're watching the numbers go up. We really, really appreciate that. We will try to constantly come up with interesting content that you actually want to listen to.
That's why you should send us an email. Give us some ideas.
Yeah, and as always, we will always do our level best to help you tap into your angler within.